Do you remember Shia LaBeouf? The prodigy who lit up Disney and exploded into global fame with Transformers, becoming the face of a generation overnight. But the world never saw the fractures beneath that rising star, wounds carved long before Hollywood ever touched him. Behind every chaotic headline were deeper truths, addiction, rage, and a childhood so violent it haunted every role he played. And even more shocking, the evidence revealed in allegations and court filings exposed a darkness far beyond what fans imagined. How does a young icon, raised to captivate millions, end up fighting demons even fame couldn't silence? The rare photos and untold story buried for decades will be uncovered in this video. Stay until the end to understand why Shia LaBeouf's tragedy is one Hollywood still fears to confront. Shia LaBeouf was born on June 11, 1986, in Los Angeles. But unlike many Hollywood stories, fame wasn't a dream his family chased. Survival was. His earliest memories were not of toys, sunlight, or laughter, but of shouting rehab clinics and rooms lit by the flicker of a television because the electricity sometimes didn't stay on. His father, Jeffrey Craig LaBeouf, a Vietnam War veteran, carried the kind of wounds that never fully healed. The war had taken pieces of him, and drugs took the rest. Shia would later describe his father as a man with demons, a presence that oscillated between affection and terror. Jeffrey battled heroin addiction, rage episodes, paranoia, and the long shadow of PTSD. For a child, this meant living in an unpredictable storm, never knowing whether the next moment would bring a hug or an explosion. His mother, Shayna, was an artist trying to keep the family together on little more than hope and odd jobs. She sold handmade jewelry, performed mime on street corners, and worked wherever she could, but money never stayed in their pockets for long. They moved constantly, run-down apartments, motels, sometimes a friend's sofa when rent slipped out of reach. Each move carved into Shia's mind a sense of instability. Photographs from those years, rarely shown publicly, reveal a thin, sharp-eyed boy standing in cluttered rooms, shoulders slightly tense, as if even the camera might break the fragile calm around him. In interviews many years later, Shia recalled hearing gunshots outside their building, the sound of police sirens becoming part of the night's background music. But even those noises were less frightening than the silences, the long stretches when his father disappeared, or when his parents fought behind closed doors, voices cracking under the weight of stress neither could escape. The emotional burden of the household was heavier than anything a child should carry. To cope, Shia became the family's accidental clown. He learned to be funny not because he wanted to entertain, but because laughter diffused tension. Comedy became a shield, a way to make his mother smile, a way to distract his father from spiraling into another episode. By the age of 10, he performed small stand-up routines in local coffee shops, reciting jokes he wrote to survive. The applause he earned wasn't the applause of ambition. It was the applause of necessity. But the darker moments left deeper marks. Shia has spoken about being exposed to violence, chaos, and fear far too young. In Honey Boy, the semi-autobiographical film he wrote years later during rehabilitation, he portrayed a child desperate for love from a father who could not give it. The film wasn't fiction, it was a confession. Every scene mirrored the reality he carried. The emotional manipulation, the desperate need for approval, the crushing weight of being the adult in a house full of broken pieces. At one point, his father insisted on serving as Shia's guardian on set, partly because he needed a job, partly because he feared losing control of the boy who was becoming the family's primary income source. But even then, the relationship remained tangled. Love laced with anger, generosity tangled with guilt. The child who made millions before he turned 16 still felt poor, still felt unsafe, still felt unseen for who he truly was. The world would eventually meet Shia LaBeouf the star, but Shia LaBeouf the child was formed long before the red carpets and flashing lights. He was shaped in dim motel rooms, under the shadow of addiction, and within a family struggling against its own collapse. His talent came from real pain. His charisma came from survival instincts. And the volatility he displayed as an adult was not a mystery. It was the echo of a childhood spent navigating landmines. In the quiet of that early life, one truth settled deep within him. Everything could fall apart at any moment. And years later, as fame arrived with overwhelming force, that belief, born in the chaos of his childhood, would ignite the unraveling the world would witness. By the late 1990s, Shia LaBeouf was a child living between two worlds. The chaos of home and the small moments of attention he earned from strangers who found his stand-up comedy both surprising and strange. His jokes weren't polished, but they carried a sharpness, a survival-born wit that made people look twice. He wasn't just performing. He was reaching for safety in every laugh he could pull from the room. One evening, after a particularly tense fight between his parents, he picked up the phone and called a talent agency, using the yellow pages because they had no internet, no manager, no connections. He pretended to be his own agent. The confidence wasn't real, but the desperation was. And it worked. He was invited for an audition not long after. Hollywood didn't see a polished child star. They saw raw electricity. Disney cast him in Even Stevens in 1999. And from that moment, his life split into yet another pair of realities. On camera, he was Lewis Stevens, chaotic, hilarious, disarmingly lovable. Off camera, he was a boy carrying trauma that no one on set could imagine. The studio loved him because he could turn pain into comedy instantly. Directors praised his timing, his fearlessness, his instinct. Other young actors needed coaching. Shia needed freedom. He filled the frame with a kind of unpredictable brightness. Rare photos from the early 2000s show a skinny teenager in oversized t-shirts, standing on Disney lots with a half smile, the kind of smile a kid makes when he's grateful but tired. His talent was obvious, but so was the pressure. His father, Jeffrey, often accompanied him on set, working as his paid guardian. Their relationship, already complicated, became wrapped in contracts, studio rules, and intermittent moments of tension that cast long shadows across the cheerful environment of a children's comedy show. Shia won a Daytime Emmy Award in 2003, and the industry began using words like brilliant, unpredictable, star potential. But the more praise he received, the more fractured he became inside. Fame didn't feel like success, it felt like responsibility. And responsibility had always been heavy for him. It meant protecting his mother financially. It meant keeping his father calm. It meant being the one stable element in a life built on instability. His castmates saw him as energetic, eccentric, sometimes intense to the point of discomfort. Crew members noticed how Shia could flip from charm to silence in a heartbeat. What they didn't see was that the set had become the safest place in his life. The first environment where rules were consistent, adults were accountable, and applause wasn't tied to chaos. But even in this comparatively stable world, the darkness followed him quietly. During one particularly stressful year, Shia later admitted he began experimenting with alcohol. He was barely a teenager. The substance didn't hook him instantly, but it planted a seed, a whisper that there was a way to numb the chaos when laughter wasn't enough. A whisper that would grow much louder years later. Yet despite this undercurrent of danger, Shia's talent accelerated beyond his peers. He began booking film roles, small parts at first, each one revealing a different shade of his craft. He had grit, vulnerability, and fire, a combination Hollywood adored in young men. The Disney chapter was supposed to be his foundation. Instead, it became a mask, a glossy, sanitized image stamped over a boy who was already starting to fracture. The world saw a confident, comedic prodigy. But behind the scenes, Shia was learning a painful truth. Fame could decorate a broken childhood, but it could not heal it. And as he crossed from Disney's bright sets into the darker, high-pressure world of blockbuster cinema, those hidden fractures were about to crack open for the world to see. By the mid-2000s, Shia LaBeouf had outgrown the brightly lit world of Disney. Hollywood was evolving, searching for new faces that could bridge youthful unpredictability and leading man charisma. Shia, with his sharp humor, restless energy, and emotional volatility simmering beneath the surface, became the industry's unexpected answer. In 2007, everything changed. Transformer premiered, and almost overnight, Shia was no longer just a promising young actor. He became the face of a billion-dollar franchise. Michael Bay, known for turning actors into icons, praised him for being fearless, instinctive, and wired differently. That difference was exactly what made Shia magnetic on screen. He didn't act fear, he embodied it. He didn't perform chaos, he radiated it, and audiences felt it. Rare behind-the-scenes photos from that period show a young man drenched in sweat, sprinting across rubble-filled sets, explosions erupting behind him, the chaos of the film mirroring the turbulence he carried inside. But on red carpets, he wore a suit, smiled confidently, and responded to questions with quick wit and surprise and maturity. Publicly, he was the industry's new champion. The relatable action star, the scrappy underdog who made it big. But there were cracks forming beneath the surface. While filming Transformers, Shia was already struggling with the emotional weight of fame. Fame that came without guidance, without grounding, without the stable childhood most actors leaned on. Directors admired his dedication. But crew members noticed moments of sudden intensity, arguments that flared without warning, and an exhaustion that seemed deeper than the physical demands of the role. Then came the accident. In July 2008, just after the success of Transformers, Shia flipped his truck in a crash that made headlines across the world. His hand was crushed, requiring multiple surgeries, and rumors swirled that alcohol had been involved. The official case was later dismissed, but the damage, both physical and symbolic, lingered. The accident became the first public confirmation that the chaos inside him was beginning to spill outward. After that, paparazzi photos captured a different Shia. Tense jawline, clenched fists, cigarettes burning to the filter, sunglasses worn at night to conceal fatigue that had nothing to do with filming hours. Interviews grew stranger, edgier. He spoke of internal wars, artistic frustration, and a restlessness that fame only amplified. Still, Hollywood pushed him forward. He starred in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, 2008, Eagle Eye, 2008, Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, 2010. Critics praised his range. Studios saw revenue. Fans saw a rising legend. But no one saw the storm gathering behind the spotlight. Shia himself later admitted he felt exposed, hunted, and unprepared for pressure. Everywhere he went, cameras followed, capturing both triumph and unraveling, often in the same day. Michael Bay once said Shia had an unpredictability you can't teach. It was meant as a compliment. In reality, it hinted at the instability that fame would soon magnify. Every set demanded perfection. Every premiere demanded composure. Every headline demanded a fresh narrative. And Shia, whose life had been shaped by survival rather than structure, struggled to carry a weight that grew heavier with every blockbuster. Publicly, he was unstoppable. Privately, he was fraying. He began relying on alcohol more frequently, at first to decompress after long days, then to silence the noise that fame amplified. The boy who once used comedy to calm the storms at home was now using intoxication to silence storms inside himself. And the more Hollywood celebrated him, the more he felt like an imposter trapped inside the image the world insisted he be. Rare paparazzi videos from this period show him stumbling out of bars, frustrated, agitated, swarmed by flashing lights. Each clip chipped away at the charming public persona the media had built for him. The narrative began to shift from Hollywood's rising star to Hollywood's troubled talent. But this was only the beginning, because the fame that had lifted him into global stardom was the same fame that would accelerate his collapse. A collapse the world would witness in real time, one arrest, one outburst, one headline at a time. And as Hollywood cheered his ascent, no one realized that Shia was already falling. The rise was fast, but the unraveling was faster. By 2011, Shia LaBeouf was no longer the young Disney star learning to navigate Hollywood. He was a global celebrity battling demons that fame had only sharpened. What the world saw as rebellion was, in truth, the beginning of a collapse years in the making. It started quietly. Drunken nights, impulsive outbursts, arguments with strangers, moments of rage that flickered like sparks before turning into flames. Paparazzi captured the first warning signs. Shia stumbling out of bars with unfocused eyes, clothes rumpled, trying to push past cameras that felt more like weapons and lenses. Each image told a darker story than the last. In 2011, during a night out in Vancouver, he was caught on video being punched in the face after a heated argument outside a bar. The footage went viral, not because of the violence, but because of what it revealed. A young actor spiraling, unable to control the storm inside him. For many viewers, it was a shocking fall from grace. For those who understood trauma, It was heartbreakingly predictable. But the breakdown didn't stop there. During the filming of Lawless in 2012, co-stars described Shia as reckless and consumed by method acting. He drank heavily before scenes to embody his character's brutality, blurring the line between fiction and reality. The intensity that once made him magnetic now made him dangerous, mostly to himself. By 2014, the downward spiral became impossible to hide. That year, Shia walked into a performance at Cabaret on Broadway, drunk, agitated, and ready to explode. Witnesses claimed he shouted obscenities, slapped audience members, and refused to leave the theater. Police handcuffed him, dragged him outside, and the paparazzi flashes lit up his dazed expression like a crime scene. Those images became some of the most infamous rare photos of his career, the moment Hollywood realized something was deeply wrong. A police report later stated he threatened officers and spit at them. Shia himself would eventually describe that night as the bottom, the point where his double life, the star and the broken boy beneath, violently collided. Then came the mugshot. Under harsh fluorescent lighting, his face looked hollow, exhausted, almost unrecognizable from the action hero audiences adored. His eyes, once filled with youthful fire, now carried a vacant ache. This photograph circulated across tabloids, pairing Shia's image with headlines of meltdown and disgrace. No blockbuster could shield him now. Hollywood, quick to celebrate its darlings, was equally quick to distance itself from its troubled ones. Directors hesitated. Studios backed away. Insurance companies saw him as a liability. And Shia, for the first time in his career, felt the weight of isolation that fame had masked for years. But the spiral deepened. In 2015, while filming Man Down, he attempted sobriety but relapsed repeatedly. He fought with police in Austin after being denied a cigarette, shouting, "Do you know my name?" A line repeated endlessly online, turning his distress into viral mockery. These moments weren't just scandals. They were symptoms of untreated trauma, addiction, and a child who had never learned how to cope with the world he'd been thrust into. Rehab came and went, each attempt offering a glimmer of stability that vanished the moment he stepped back into reality. Paparazzi photographs captured him walking alone through Los Angeles streets, hoodie pulled low, beard untrimmed, eyes cast downward, a man struggling to outrun himself. Some images showed him with swollen knuckles, scratches on his hands, signs of self-directed anger that no publicist could conceal. Then, in 2017, Shia was arrested again in Savannah, Georgia, after a drunken altercation. Body cam footage later released to the public showed him hurling insults, stumbling, pleading, and collapsing emotionally. It was raw, painful, and impossible to watch without feeling the depth of his unraveling. This wasn't rebellion. This was a cry for help from someone drowning in wounds he had never been taught to name. But the most revealing chapter of his darkness had not yet surfaced. Because beneath the arrest, the alcohol, the rage, and the viral moments, a far deeper truth, one tied directly to his childhood, was waiting to break open. And when it did, the world would finally understand the devastating origins of Shia LaBeouf's destruction. As Shia's downward spiral intensified, the public believed they were watching the rise and fall of another troubled celebrity. But Shia wasn't collapsing because of fame alone. He was collapsing because fame had removed the last walls holding his childhood trauma in place. And in 2019, the world would get its first real glimpse into the darkness he had been carrying. While in court-ordered rehab, Shia was encouraged to write as part of his therapy. What began as notes evolved into a screenplay. Those pages became Honey Boy, a film that would expose the emotional architecture of Shia's breakdown more clearly than any headline ever could. In Honey Boy, Shia played a fictionalized version of his own father, a choice that stunned Hollywood and devastated him emotionally. The performance was raw, painful, and unfiltered. The film portrayed a boy abused, manipulated, and forced to grow up in ways no child should. It depicted the volatility of a father battling addiction and PTSD, a household where fear and love were indistinguishable. Critics praised Honey Boy as a masterpiece, but for Shia, it was something else entirely, a confession carved into film. In interviews, he admitted, "I didn't know I was traumatized. I thought I was just bad." This was the heart of Shia's collapse. Not ego, not fame, not rebellion. but a lifetime of untreated wounds erupting all at once. His therapist diagnosed him with PTSD, alcoholism, and rage disorder. Rehab forced him to confront what he had avoided for decades. For the first time, Shia began speaking openly about his past, the instability, the fear, the emotional scars that shaped him. He attempted sobriety with earnestness, admitting that alcohol had become his way of silencing memories he didn't know how to live with. For a brief moment, it looked like redemption was possible. He acted in The Peanut Butter Falcon, a film that earned widespread praise. He reconnected with creativity. He apologized publicly for past behavior. Hollywood, cautiously, began welcoming him back. But darkness doesn't disappear simply because someone wants it to. In December 2020, the world saw the most devastating chapter of Shia's story when musician F.G. Twigs filed a lawsuit accusing him of sexual battery, assault, emotional manipulation, and psychological torment. The allegations were specific, disturbing, and supported by detailed documents. They describe a relationship defined by control, fear, and cycles of cruelty that mirrored patterns often seen in survivors of unresolved trauma. The lawsuit hit Hollywood like a shockwave. F.G. Twigs stated Shia isolated her, threatened her, and created an environment of terror. Her testimony was calm, articulate, and heartbreaking. She said, "I didn't think it was possible for someone to hurt me like that." For many, this became the moment Shia's image shifted permanently. Not from troubled star to misunderstood artist, but to a man whose unhealed wounds had begun to wound others. Shia responded with a statement that was both an apology and an admission. "I have no excuses for my alcohol abuse or aggression. I have been abusive to myself and everyone around me for years." He entered treatment again, this time for intensive inpatient therapy. Reports emerged that he was diagnosed with complex PTSD, a condition deeply rooted in childhood trauma. He stepped away from public life, retreating into silence and recovery programs, attempting to rebuild himself from the inside out. Paparazzi photos during this period show a man transformed, not physically, but emotionally. Shia walking alone outside a rehabilitation center, shoulders slumped, face bare the bravado he once wore like armor. Shia sitting on a bench in reflection, hands clasped tightly, as if holding himself together. Shia attending trauma support groups where no one cared about his fame. These images were not scandals. They were echoes of the boy he once was, a boy who had learned pain before joy, chaos before safety. The lawsuit remains one of the defining turning points of his life, not because it destroyed his career, but because it forced him to confront the last part of his past he had never acknowledged, the damage he had done to others. And in that confrontation, Shia LaBeouf faced a truth more agonizing than addiction, fame, or failure. He had become the very thing he once feared. By the time the lawsuit surfaced in 2020, Shia LaBeouf's fall from grace was no longer a sequence of isolated scandals. It was a full collapse. The world he had built through talent, charisma, and sheer force came crashing down with a weight he could no longer outrun. For the first time in his career, there were no excuses, no misunderstandings, no studio narratives to soften the blow. The truth, in all its devastating clarity, stood in front of him, and he broke. In the weeks following the allegations, Shia had disappeared from the public eye entirely. The man once chased by paparazzi was suddenly nowhere. No sightings, no statements, no desperate attempt to control. It was as if the spotlight he had spent his entire life performing under had finally burned out. Those close to him described his state as emotionally vacant, a man confronting a lifetime of consequences all at once. But it was what he chose to do next that signaled the beginning of a profound internal shift. Shia checked into an intensive inpatient treatment program. Not a quick rehab visit, not a public relations gesture, but full surrender to the work he had avoided for years. Therapists who worked with him later stated he was diagnosed with complex PTSD, stemming from long-term childhood trauma, and with patterns of emotional dysregulation rooted in survival instincts he never learned to outgrow. For months, he underwent trauma therapy, accountability sessions, and addiction treatment. According to court documents, he attended multiple recovery programs simultaneously, attempting to rebuild himself from ground zero. This was the explosive, unpredictable Shia the world knew. This was a man stripped bare, confronting the darkest parts of himself in rooms where no one cared about his fame. But the most unexpected turning point came not from rehab, but from a place of silence after leaving treatment. Shia spent significant time in a Franciscan monastery in California. The monks welcomed him under one condition. He had to follow their rules. No cameras, no ego, no past. Just work, prayer, and reflection. He slept in a small cell-like room, ate simple meals, cleaned floors, washed dishes, and attended spiritual readings with men who knew nothing of Hollywood. For someone raised in chaos, the quiet was overwhelming. He spoke about waking up before dawn to the sound of distant bells, walking through cold stone halls lit only by candles. The silence forced him to face the parts of himself he had spent decades drowning in alcohol, anger, and performance. At the monastery, no one applauded him. No one feared him. No one expected anything from him. And for the first time in his life, Shia found himself in a world where peace did not need to be earned, only accepted. It was during this period that he began to take real responsibility, not just for pain inflicted on him, but for the pain he had inflicted on others. He spoke in group therapy about remorse, shame, and a fear deeper than any acting role had ever required him to portray. He admitted to the patterns of harm, the cycles he had continued, the uncontrollable storms he had carried into every relationship. He said quietly, "I hurt people because I didn't know how to live without the chaos. It was all I knew." In this environment, stripped of celebrity, Shia started reconnecting with something he had lost long ago: humanity. Not the Hollywood version crafted on red carpets, but the fragile, wounded human being beneath the layers of childhood survival mechanisms and adult self-destruction. The turning points did not erase his past. They did not absolve the harm he caused, nor did they restore him to stardom. Redemption was not cinematic. It was quiet, slow, and incomplete. But something in him changed. The man who once fought the world with rage now approached it with humility. The boy who had grown up in chaos was finally learning what peace felt like. And yet, as he prepared to step back into the public sphere, one question remained. One that neither therapy nor silence nor confession could fully answer. After everything he had endured and everything he had done, was Shia LaBeouf capable of rebuilding a life beyond the ruins of his past? In the years after his treatment and retreat into monastic silence, Shia LaBeouf reemerged not as the defiant star the world once knew, but as a man cautiously stepping back into a world he no longer fully trusted. Hollywood was no longer his battlefield. It had become something distant, a place he had both conquered and been destroyed by, and he approached it with the fragile awareness of someone who understood that one wrong step could break him again. His return to acting was deliberate, almost reverent. He accepted roles far smaller than the blockbusters that once made him a household name. In Padre Pio, 2022, he portrayed a tormented priest wrestling with faith, guilt, and inner demons, a role eerily aligned with his own struggle for redemption. Directors praise his depth, his vulnerability, the raw truth he brought to every scene. It was clear that the chaos that once consumed him had also forged him into an actor capable of emotional honesty few could match. But public reception remained complicated. For some, Shia was an artist fighting his way back from darkness, a man actively working to break generational cycles of trauma. To others, he was a cautionary tale, a symbol of unchecked harm, and a reminder that talent cannot erase responsibility. Hollywood, an industry built on reinvention, held him at arm's length, respecting his craft but wary of the storm that once followed him. Rare photos from this period show a very different Shia, walking alone, hoodie pulled over his head, no entourage, carrying books instead of scripts, attending support meetings quietly without fanfare, visiting the monastery again, as if returned to the only place where he could breathe without performing. He began speaking more softly in interviews, offering reflections instead of dramatic declarations. His relationship with faith deepened, though not in a performative way, more like a man holding on to something that keeps him steady when the world feels unsteady. Shia's later years have been defined less by the pursuit of fame and more by the pursuit of understanding. Understanding himself, his past, the people he hurt, and the man he hopes to become. He has talked about fatherhood, accountability, and the possibility of healing, not as guarantees, but as ongoing work. Redemption is not a chapter for him. It is a lifetime assignment. But his legacy remains one of contradiction. On one side lies the undeniable brilliance, the performances that burn with authenticity, the raw emotional landscapes he brought to the screen, the transformative artistry of Honey Boy and the Peanut Butter Falcon. On the other lies the undeniable harm, the emotional destruction, the volatility, the trauma he repeated rather than resolved. And perhaps this contradiction is his legacy, a reminder that genius can grow from pain, but pain left untreated can consume genius entirely. A reminder that Hollywood often celebrates wounded prodigies without giving them the tools to survive. A reminder that behind every meteoric rise is a human being shaped long before fame ever found them. Shia LaBeouf's story is not finished. It may never be tidy or triumphant or universally forgiven, but it stands as one of the most haunting portraits of modern celebrity, a life where talent, trauma, and self-destruction collided again and again, leaving behind a legacy both luminous and deeply scarred. In the end, Shia LaBeouf's story is not simply one of fame lost or fame regained. It is the story of a child who grew into a man without ever learning where the pain ended and the performance began. His brilliance captured the world, but his wound shaped everything the world never saw. Behind the headlines, the scandals, the apologies, and the attempts at redemption lies a truth both uncomfortable and deeply human. We are all shaped by the shadows we inherit. Shia's journey does not offer easy answers. There is no perfect closure, no clean redemption arc, no final act where everything is resolved. There is only a man still learning how to live with the pieces of himself he once tried to run from. And as the curtain falls, one quiet realization remains. Some stories are not meant to be understood, only witnessed.